Good afternoon, everyone. We hope you've been having a great weekend so far and are staying warm and safe. My name is Katrina Langsabeth, and I'm one of the co-presidents of Project Pulse Winnipeg this semester. Project Pulse is a student-led nonprofit organization whose goal is to familiarize high school and post-secondary students with the field of health sciences. Quite notably, the organization is navigating an online platform in these pandemic times. We have a smaller audience today, but we understand that it is a busy time for everyone. Nonetheless, we are super appreciative to have all of you here, whether you have been following us since 2020 or might be tuning in for the first time today. All of the executive team roles are filled with passionate and hardworking students from diverse cultural and academic communities in Winnipeg. They're in the audience, so maybe give us a quick wave, guys. Thanks, folks. All these roles contribute significantly to Project Pulse Winnipeg in unique ways and help plan this professional panel. Today, our professional relations co-directors, Rhea and Miguel, will be hosting this event. Voke, our marketing director, is moderating the chat and will be providing tech support. On behalf of the team, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our audience and our panelists. We encourage everyone to have their cameras on for the best experience of engaging with our panelists, but it is not a requirement. Please note that this event will be recorded and the recording will be posted on Project Pulse Winnipeg's website. We ask that you fill out and return the waiver attached to the email you received this morning to confirm your consent to be recorded and posted as a part of the video. If we do not have your permission to feature you in the video, you do not need to turn on your camera for the panel and are welcome to engage through the chat function instead. Without further ado, I will hand this off to Rhea and Miguel to introduce themselves and today's distinguished guests.
Thanks for that introduction, Katrina. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Miguel San Pedro. I'm a grade 12 student at the Maples Met School, and I'm one of the professional relations directors this year.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rhea Gupta. I'm a grade 11 student at St. John's Ravenscourt School. I am the other professional relations director for this year. With that, we are very pleased to introduce our esteemed panelists, beginning with Dr. David Alexander. Dr. David Alexander is a PhD-trained microbiologist with a long-standing interest in the epidemiology of infectious diseases. For the past 14 years, he has worked in the provincial public health laboratory system, first at the Public Health Ontario Laboratories in Toronto, and then at the Saskatchewan Disease Control Laboratory in Regina. Since 2016, Dr. Alexander has been a scientist at the CADM Provincial Laboratory. In pre-pandemic times, his work focused on provincial surveillance of foodborne illnesses and sexually transmitted infections. For the past year, Dr. Alexander has been very active in the provincial laboratory response to the COVID-19 pandemic, including the development and validation of tests for COVID-19 and research into variants of concern. Dr. Alexander, we are incredibly pleased to have you with us today.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, and thanks for organizing this event. And to all of you watching, thanks for tuning in. So yes, my name is David Alexander, and my actual title is scientist. I work at CADM Provincial Lab, which is Manitoba's provincial public health laboratory. I'll say more about my work later, but really we do two things. We test for infectious diseases, and then we do surveillance work to track the spread of these diseases across the province. If we go back to the beginning, I grew up in what I thought was a very average and very boring middle-class household with my parents and a sister and a cat. My mom was a teacher, like many of my relatives, and so there was a great emphasis put on education and schools. My dad is a mechanical engineer and very interested in technology, so it really wasn't a surprise when I went to university and I studied sciences. My first year at university, I learned two things. The first is that I'm really, really terrible at physics. And that's important because physics is a prerequisite for a variety of programs. So I wasn't going to be a mechanical engineer like my dad. I needed to find my own path. The other thing I learned is that I love microbiology. In my first year at university, I took an introductory class and just was so fascinated by this magical and mysterious microbial world that surrounds us. And so for my undergrad, I pursued a BSc in microbiology and immunology. In my third year, I worked part-time in a lab that studied viruses and parasitic worms. And in my fourth year, I did an honors project where I studied E. coli, and I actually got a peer-reviewed publication of that. So because of that sort of experience and hard work and some good grades, I actually managed to win a scholarship to graduate school. I'd stayed at home for my undergrad, but for grad school, I moved to Montreal and enrolled in McGill University. For those of you not familiar with graduate school, there's a variety of different programs out there, but the science program I was in, again, it focused on microbiology and immunology. And although there were some classroom activities and tests and that sort of thing, the focus was my thesis project. So I was engaged in my own research, studying a topic that no one else had studied before. And as far as I knew, nobody else in the world was tackling. And that's the way this program works. You have this research and you work under the supervision of an academic, a professor at the university who runs a lab, advises you on your thesis, and along with a panel of other professors, they kind of coach you. You learn how to design experiments, you learn how to collect data and analyze it properly, and you learn how to present your findings either in peer-reviewed literature or in panel discussions or other public presentations. And then along with all of your colleagues and peers, you hopefully develop a network that you can build on to do other projects. And the idea is when you're done and you've submitted your final PhD thesis, you have enough training and experience and all the rest to then go on and get your own academic university position and your own lab and train your own students, and this process continues. Unfortunately, not everything works out the way it's supposed to, and I really struggled through my PhD. I worked hard and I learned a lot, but there were problems with my lab, problems with my supervisor. My project, it kind of worked, but it really wasn't particularly groundbreaking. I mean, there were no fantastic publications or accolades out of it. And so after 7 years, I did graduate with my PhD, but I was in no position to move on to any sort of university position. But at that time, that's still what I wanted. So I pursued what's called a postdoctoral fellowship. And in some ways, it's a lot like a PhD in that you're doing your own research. But often as a postdoc, you have some managerial responsibilities and you help other students, younger students, guide their projects. And after all I'd learned from my PhD, some successes and many failures, I put all that to work during my postdocs. I actually did two, the first at the University of Toronto and the second one back at McGill. It was a new beginning for me and a chance to switch gears a little. Through my PhD, I'd studied genes in E. coli, but for my postdoctoral work, I switched to mycobacteria. And this is a kind of bacteria that are quite unusual. The vast majority are harmless environmental organisms, but mycobacteria include some pretty important and infamous pathogens like the organisms that cause leprosy and tuberculosis or TB. I studied TB, but I also did a lot of work on an organism called Mycobacterium avium, which isn't as well known, but it can cause disease in birds, respiratory diseases in people. And I also studied a strain that causes Johne's disease or paratuberculosis, which is a gastrointestinal disease in mainly dairy cattle and sheep. So after 6 years of postdocing, even though, it was quite successful in its own way, I still wasn't competitive enough to get a traditional academic position. And after, 7 years in grad school and then 6 more as a postdoc, it was really time for me to leave university and join the real world. So even though mycobacteria and tuberculosis are fascinating to study in sort of a research setting, they're also really, really important in the public health setting. Tuberculosis historically is, very important disease in Canada, not so much anymore because we have excellent treatments. But even so, there's still about 1,500 cases per year. And in the rest of the world, tuberculosis is still considered one of the deadliest bacterial infections, and there are millions of new infections every year. In public health, it's also known as a notifiable disease, which means every single case is reported and investigated, and contact tracing is done, just like we do for COVID now. Every case gets reported and investigated, and for tuberculosis, we've been doing that for decades and decades. Because of its public health importance, it's most often studied in a public health laboratory setting. Now, every province in Canada has a provincial public health lab, and several of them have really good tuberculosis programs. So I reached out to those programs that I knew about, talked to some people I knew, a lot of people I didn't know. There were no jobs posted for me. I just cold called whoever I could get a hold of. And eventually I got a job with Public Health Ontario at their laboratories in Toronto. Now, despite my experience, a PhD and 6 years of previous study on TB, all they could offer me was a 6-month contract. But the first contract went well, and that led to another, and eventually, after a couple of years, to a permanent job. And for the first couple of years I was in Ontario, I basically tracked tuberculosis cases through the province. But then one spring, there was this news of a new virus that had arrived in Canada, and all of a sudden, the public health lab had to kind of retool itself, develop some new tests, retrain some of its staff, get some new equipment in and up and running. And so that was the spring of 2009, and I switched from tuberculosis to the study of the H1N1 influenza pandemic. It was a really good training for COVID, not quite as crazy as this past year has been, but we did a lot of the same things. We did surveillance of cases, we looked at the variants that emerged, and also we used for the very first time something that then was cutting edge technology, which is genome sequencing instruments. So eventually the pandemic ended, but I kept using sort of the genome sequencing approach for epidemiology and studied outbreaks due to E. coli and other organisms. Toronto was really good to me, and professionally things were working really well, but I also had a personal life, and I'd fallen in love, and my girlfriend and I were expecting a baby. There's only one catch though. She was a prairie girl from St. Boniface, and at that time was living in Regina. And if you're going to raise a kid together, you kind of need to be in the same province. So I quit my job in Toronto and moved out to Saskatchewan to be with her. Now, I didn't have a job, but she's also a microbiologist. We met in the lab. We have very similar training and background. And, Regina is not a big city. It's only a couple 100,000 people. And there were basically no one else had the same experience that we did. So when my wife had our baby and went on mat leave, I was her mat leave backfill, and I took her job at the public health lab in Saskatchewan. So she stayed home with our kid, and I went to work to do her job. When she was ready to come back, I was able to get another job within the same lab. That's the Saskatchewan Disease Control Lab, which is now called the Roy Romano Provincial Lab, or RIPPLE. And the job I took had a ridiculous title. It was the Director of Information Technology and Immunoserology. It basically meant I worked with computers, and I switched from studying tuberculosis to HIV and sexually transmitted infections. The computer bit, I've always been comfortable with computers, but it was really interesting to see how a proper laboratory information management system works. Like everything else, microbiology is now involved in a lot of big data analysis, and learning how that system worked and has been incredibly valuable for a lot of the epidemiology work I do in being able to manage and manipulate large data sets. So again, Saskatchewan was good to us, and especially that lab, but if you're from Manitoba, you know how people feel about Saskatchewan. And my wife had a chance to move back to Winnipeg and just jumped at the chance. So again, I quit my job and followed her to Winnipeg, because even though she had a brand new job with Shared Health, I didn't have anything. But after 8 years in the provincial lab system, it didn't take me that long to join the CADM lab, where I am now. CADM has been serving Manitoba for, this is actually its 125th year. It's been through a variety of pandemics and does a wide variety of testing. Right now, it's got about 140 people who work there. There are only 6 scientists. Most of the people who work at the lab are what are called medical laboratory technologists. And that's a program, it's about a 2.5-year program at Red River College. You don't need a university degree to get into it. And actually, although a few people do have BScs, the technologist program, basically you get a job right out of college. So it's a really interesting avenue to explore. As far as the scientists go, all of us have either master's degrees or PhDs, and each of us is responsible for a particular section of the lab. In non-COVID times, my section is clinical bacteriology. And I basically study 3 things, as was mentioned in the introduction. I look at antibiotic-resistant superbugs, sexually transmitted diseases due to mainly gonorrhea and syphilis. And I also track foodborne illnesses due to things like E. coli and salmonella. And we use a wide variety of techniques to study that, but the one that I'm still pursuing is what's called genetic or genomic epidemiology, where we're looking at the DNA signatures of organisms to watch them as they change and spread. So just about a year ago, CADM started testing routinely for COVID, and it's really taken over our world the last year. There's a lot of work that goes into developing and setting up a new test, and it's not a super common thing that we do, but in the past year, we've set up 7 different testing platforms for COVID and explored a variety of other things. And also I've had to learn how to do viral genome sequencing. It's still something I'm working on, and we work very closely with other folks in Canada, especially at the National Microbiology Lab. I've been doing that kind of work since last March, but if you read the Winnipeg Free Press, the news, there's been a lot this week about variants of concern in the UK 117, B117 strain. So that is part of my work, is finding and tracking those variants. So I think my time is just about up, so I will end there, but I look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Alexander, for sharing those experiences and your journey into microbiology and public health. Our second speaker, Ms. Jenifer Sharshonov, has had a passion for the sciences since a very young age. When she first began her studies at the University of Manitoba back in 2014, she was immediately drawn to chemistry courses such as biochemistry and organic chemistry. In her second year, she became interested in pharmacology and the clinical application of such chemicals, inspired by a close friend that was studying pharmacy at that time. The study content aligned perfectly with her interest. And despite the challenging and lengthy path to becoming a pharmacist, it was a decision she would never regret. Ms. Sharshonov had graduated from the College of Pharmacy at the University of Manitoba in May 2020 and immediately began working in a small independent pharmacy. Her favorite aspect of this profession is the close relationship she builds and maintains with all of her patients. They look up to her for her expertise and guidance because she and others like her are experts in therapeutics and medication management. She was able to realize she can make a difference in people's health and people's lives. Ms. Sharshonov, thank you so much for being here, and please feel free to start your discussion.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you guys for having me. So yeah, I'm Jenifer. I am currently a pharmacist practicing here in Manitoba. I recently graduated just this past May 2020. And because of COVID, we didn't even really have a graduation. We had a Zoom graduation and it was kind of pathetic. So I still can't really wrap myself around the fact that I'm done school, because you spend 6 years of post-secondary education, university education. So it's just a strange concept. So like Miguel was saying, back in high school, so nobody in my family was in the healthcare field. Actually, my dad is a computer software engineer. My mother is a bank teller. So nobody, and even my brother, my grandparents, it just kind of something that came to me as I was studying in high school. I had very close relationships with my biology teachers, my chemistry teachers, my physics teachers, anything in the science field I held very close to me. I was very passionate about math as well, calculus. I remember taking AP or university calculus when I was in high school. I was just very drawn towards that. So that's kind of where my interest in the healthcare field began. And to be frank with everyone, when I was going into university, I wanted to be something of a genetic counseling or something of that sort. And then I just looked at the path of it and it just didn't really excite me very much. It seemed like a very long and lengthy process in terms of jobs. There weren't so many. So it's something you also have to consider. So now that you are going towards university and things like that, is the job that you want to do, do you have a lot of choice? Do you have a lot of flexibility with it? Is the market calling for it? It's something I didn't consider until I was already in university. Then starting university, I loaded up on all the sciences, the biologies, the chemistries, like Miguel was saying, anything with a CHEM and 4 digits code, I was very into, and I just decided to try everything. I think towards the end of first year, this was already past the deadline for applying into pharmacy. I was studying with a friend of mine in the library late in the evening, like most of my university time. And he was studying pharmacy and I just looked over his notes. I looked over the pharmacology that he was studying and I was like, this is really cool. Like, this is very interesting because chemistry was my passion. I like the biology aspect, but chemistry is what I was really drawn into. And it was kind of like being a chemist, but not as intense as Dr. Alexander here in the microbiology and stuff. So yeah, and after that, I just decided to apply. I figured I wanted to be in the healthcare field. I wanted to help patients. I wanted to do something good with my education, with my life. I wanted to make a difference. I knew I didn't want to be a doctor because I didn't want to get down and dirty and touch patients' blood, etc. So I needed to do something that was a little bit less invasive. So then once I applied to pharmacy, now I think they did change it because now it's a PharmD program. So I may not have all the answers to the current application process, but at the time you had to have a certain GPA, I believe it's 3.75 or something along those lines. But again, things may have changed in the core courses that they require. So these include the biologies, chemistries, psychology or some sort of sociology course, calculus. There's a total of 10 classes at the time. I believe now they included the biochemistries and organic chemistries prior to you starting your education at the College of Pharmacy, which is a downside because those courses are a little bit more difficult, and I do recognize that a lot of people struggle to achieve high grades, especially in organic chemistry. Usually what happens is if you're good at biochemistry, you struggle with organic chemistry. We usually don't recommend to take both at the same time, which is what I did in second year, and it didn't work out to my best ability. But a lot of people take spring or summer courses, so they split those up and it actually ends up working in your favor. So if you are considering spring or summer courses later in your university career, I personally didn't do it, but a lot of my friends did, and they do recommend it. So yeah, thereafter I applied. There is an exam. There is no, well, I guess now there's the potential of the exam, but at the time it was a critical thinking essay. So you are presented with a paragraph and you have 1 hour to write an essay, whether you're for or against this. And it's a very different exam because it's not very easy to prepare for. It just tests your ability to critically think about a topic based on a statement and try to reason out why you're going to go with that decision. There's no right or wrong answer. It tests your ability to think critically on the spot and do it thoroughly. Obviously, there's grammar and spelling and all that stuff. But you do learn that. I think my English became much better after first year university when I took an English course. Prior to that, it was probably one of my worst classes. Not saying that I was bad, but I moved to Canada 14 years ago now, so I didn't grow up speaking English. I moved here from Israel, and so yeah, language is a barrier at the beginning. Yeah, thereafter, second year, I just took a few courses that I would have taken in pharmacy, like the biochemistries and organic chemistries, because I didn't go into pharmacy directly after that first year. So to save myself some time while I'm in pharmacy, I took the courses that I was able to take prior to being in the College of Pharmacy. So microbiome, organic chemistry, biochemistry, and biochemistry 2. That way I can do it on a lighter course load as opposed to doing it in the College of Pharmacy, where first year, I believe it's 7 courses per semester and full-time is considered 4. So it's a very hefty degree. And so it just lightened up my course for the first year and allowed me to work on the side so I can pay for school, etc. Once I was in the College of Pharmacy, like I said, it's a difficult degree to do. You require a lot of discipline, a lot of time management skills. It's different from regular university where you have, I don't know if anyone is aware of how courses work there, but you register for a 3 credit hour course or 6 credit hour course, etc. And they are spaced out. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you have a class from 11:30 to 12:30, and then you have your other courses. So your schedule in university is very actually open. It's up to you to learn, and it's up to you to sit down in the library for hours on end, studying, because they don't teach you a lot in class versus in high school. You have your 8 to 4 full of class, or 9 to 4, whatever the schedule is, and you get very involved with your professors. Questions are being asked. So you learn a lot in class versus university. It's a lot of self-teaching, unfortunately. The professors provide you with the content, and it's up to you to do your best to commit it to memory, understand it, memorize it. Obviously, the profs are there for as a resource if you need to speak with them or meet with them after hours, but a lot of the learning is on you, so you do have to, discipline is my biggest advice for university. Once I was at the College of Pharmacy, the classes end up being, we'd have classes from 9 till 12, then you have your lunch break for 45 minutes or whatever it may be, and then you have your afternoon classes. You're done at 4:35. Then you're busing home. You get home at like 6:30. You spend your entire evening studying the content, and you study every day. Just because the amount of material that you're studying, the amount of material that you're studying requires a lot of time and effort. So pharmacy, as most people would know, we are the drug experts. We're the drug experts, and you have to know all the drugs, the adverse effects. You have to know the drug interactions. There's just a lot of memorizing. There's also a lot of understanding when you're looking at the chemistry behind the drugs and understanding practical applications of that. But it is a lot of commitment. So you have to be ready and expect that your life during the course of your studying is going to be very committed to studying, essentially. That being said, when summer came around, April I'd stop school. May, June I'd work. I was working at a restaurant, Earl's Restaurant, because to be honest with you, at the time, that was what paid my school, and it's also what paid my travels. So every summer I'd go away to Europe and travel and do great things, and then come back in the fall, fresh head, and commit myself to school once more. So everyone does things differently. A lot of my classmates would work during the summer. A lot of them worked in a pharmacy, actually. I worked in a pharmacy during first year university for a little bit, doing blister packaging, because that's what students were able to do at the time. And I just thought to myself that it wasn't worth the money at the time when I was trying to pay for school, because the education is quite expensive. I think it's approximately $60,000 for the entire degree, give or take. I was lucky to have scholarships, but not everyone has that fortune. And my scholarships definitely didn't pay for my entire education. Most of it came out of pocket. So it's also something to consider. Are you financially able to pay for that university, or is there some kind of funding that you can look into? There's so many scholarships out there. Apply for every single one that you can, because you never know if you're going to get the money or not. And if you are, then great. And if not, you just spend some time writing an essay. It's not all of them are that difficult. Anyway, sorry, I'm all over the place. I didn't write anything down because I just thought this is much easier to just speak from the heart. Yeah, so pharmacy itself, it's not just, I don't know what everyone thinks you learn in school for pharmacy, but you have your first year includes your basics, anatomies, the physiologies, pharmacology, pathophysiology. So you are focusing, you create an understanding of the body, And then you understand the pathophysiology, so how disease affect the body state. As soon as you understand the pathophysiology of a disease, it makes it much simpler to apply the pharmacology, which is basically how the drug works and what the drug mimics in the body or what it's doing to replace in the body. Once you create a base, it's so much easier to build a layer on that education, because you don't learn the hardest things until you've already built all that foundation, which happens kind of third year, fourth year. That's when you're doing your main clinical courses, which take your disease and your treatment and your adverse effects and everything together. Second year, you also do medicinal chemistry, which was actually one of my favorite courses. So essentially, it's kind of like organic chemistry, but your focus is on medications, and you look at the chemical structure of the drug and you determine what gives it its effect, what gives it its potency, how it binds to receptors. And a lot of drugs in the same class are very similar, and they change small parts about them that allow them to stay longer in the body, to bind proteins better in the body, to be free so that they're active. There's a lot of chemistry involved with that, and it was actually one of my favorite courses, which actually is what led me. So in fourth year university, at the College of Pharmacy, so sixth year university, you're able to do a practical rotation at your own, like wherever you like to do. So you do, each year you do some rotations, but in the final year you do 6 weeks in a hospital, you do 6 weeks in a community pharmacy, and then 6 weeks is an elective of your choice. And I actually wanted to do research in the laboratory because, like I said, chemistry was where my passion was at, and I thought, I've never done this before, I would love to do this. And I actually got accepted to study, well, to do research in a chemistry lab at Paris Descartes, which is a university in Paris, France. And I was doing research alongside PhD candidates and postdoctorate students who were way more advanced than me on the chemistry aspect. I remember learning chemistry on the job. Like I thought I knew chemistry, but I didn't know it until I was there working with them. And so it's a really good learning experience. I was specifically studying tyrosine kinase inhibitors for the treatment of cancers. We were trying to develop novel ones to not get too technical, it's drugs for cancer treatment essentially, but more specific cancer treatment, not just your typical chemotherapy. This is specific on certain types of cancers. New market for it, and we actually, not really sure how I got to this, but I actually managed to create the molecule that we were trying to synthesize. And I was actually following the footsteps of a PhD candidate before me, and she couldn't create that final molecule. So I took all her research that she was working on before, and in that period of 6 weeks, I was able to create that final molecule. So I give her a lot of credit for all the steps beforehand, but my focus was on trying to, essentially you add a sugar group to the chemical structure that will allow it to have the highest potency, and therefore you require less of the drug to actually be effective and less of it so that you don't have harm on the body. Again, I'm rambling. So after that, graduated May 2020. We had interviews with independent pharmacies, which are quite difficult to get into because independent pharmacies usually have 1 or 2 pharmacists. They work full-time Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So unless somebody quits or somebody retires or anything of that sort, they generally don't open, because once you have the pharmacist there, they don't need an abundance of staff. They can call some relief pharmacists here and there, but to get a full-time position, it was rather difficult. But there was one pharmacy in Assiniboine, right by the Assiniboine clinic, that was actually having a pharmacist retire. And so half my class applied for that position, half of them went through the interviews, and I'm not really sure how I got it. I did not have experience working in a pharmacy before. It wasn't financially doable for me at the time. I definitely recommend it for students who want to do it, but I had my whole life to work in a pharmacy, so I didn't think it was essential for me to do it while I was in school. That was my reason personally. And I thought that I was getting enough from my education. I was an honor roll student for most of my pharmacy degree, so I didn't think that I was having to prove myself outside of school. Everyone is different though. So I started working there. I worked there for, from April, I started my internship there. Because of COVID, they were offering an accelerated internship. So once you graduate, you have to do an additional 270 hours or so of internship, because you do a lot during your actual school, but the final one is you have to do it outside of school. But because of COVID and none needing pharmacists, they allowed accelerated internships that cut that time in half. And I was actually able to become a licensed pharmacist much sooner. The licensing exam that was supposed to happen in May was also postponed to August. So, but they still allowed us, depending on who your owner or pharmacist was, they allowed some students to have a conditional license based on certain requirements. So I was able to practice pharmacy without having that licensing exam. Wrote the exam in August, and then the second one actually got postponed to August, then to November, and now it's being postponed to February. So at the end of the month, I'll be writing that second licensing exam. But COVID has just been a mess for everyone. Worked at that pharmacy. I decided in November to leave the pharmacy because personal reasons. My partner lives in California, so I actually moved down to California, quit my job, and was like, you know what? I can work anywhere. I can fall back on my degree. I'm a smart person. Little did I know though that the US pharmacy, it is a hefty process, and I'm still maybe thinking of pursuing it, but you have to do a foreign graduate examination, which is only offered once a year. It is offered in October, and I moved down there in November. So essentially I could not work as a pharmacist in the US, not even as an intern pharmacist, until next year, October. So while I was living there, it was great, but I realized that I needed to come back home and work because I am passionate about what I do. I love being a pharmacist. While I was working at the independent pharmacy, I love the close relationships I had with patients. I had patients personally call me to thank me that I saved their life, and there's nothing more rewarding than that. Until you experience it personally, a patient telling you or calling you or appreciating you, it just means a lot. I had one patient, can't disclose names or anything of that sort because of a Personal Health Identification Act, but he actually called me and thanked me because he was having pain, and I kept inquiring about it. I was like, is everything okay? And his daughter would come in and tell me how he's doing. His pain accelerated very rapidly. He started with Voltaren, which is just non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. I'm sure most people know Voltaren for back pain. Next thing, I see him getting T3s, then I'm getting Percocet, then we're starting on gabapentin, which is used for neuropathic pain. And the pain was escalating so rapidly, and I was just very concerned. And I asked him, like, you should go do further blood work or check work, because it just didn't make sense where his pain was coming from. It was a lot. And one day he calls me to the pharmacy and he asked to speak with me. And me being a new graduate, I was like, who wants to talk to me? Nobody knows my name. He calls me and he's like, hey, Jenifer, I just wanted to let you know, I really appreciate you checking up on me and inquiring and making sure I'm okay. He had a CT scan, blood work done. His white blood cell count was very elevated, and they actually found out that he had myeloma or leukemia, cancer of the blood, essentially. And if we didn't tell him to go further and check further, we would have never found that out. So he has been on chemotherapy, but it was very nice to hear that that my work was appreciated, because I told him, I was just like, it's just my job. I swear, this is what we're supposed to do. And he's like, no, you care, and people see that you care, and it gets you far. It gets you very far, and it's very rewarding at the end of the day. So and now I am actually back home, and I'll be working at a couple independent pharmacies part-time, splitting my time between them, and then part-time at Superstore, just trying to get my feedback in there. I'm not concerned. Pharmacies are very open, like there's jobs everywhere. It's just more so I know that I want to do either independent pharmacy just because of how close you become with the patients. You know every single patient by their name, and you learn that very quickly. And that's something that's always drawn me to healthcare. And then potentially going into hospital pharmacy because I do like the challenge. I think there is a lot to learn, and I'm young and my mind is open to new experiences. So I'm very open to doing any type of pharmacy. I think it's good to keep your options open, and there's a lot of places to work and learn. And then, yeah, potentially also do the COVID vaccinations, but that's next over the next few months as we get the vaccine in. Yeah, I guess that's it for me. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Ms. Sharshonov, for walking us through those monumental decisions you had to make as you approached pharmacy, for providing us with those words of advice. The work you do is very intriguing, so thank you for sharing that. Our final and distinguished panelist is Dr. Anuraag Shrivastav. Dr. Srivastav is a professor at the Department of Biology at the University of Winnipeg and adjunct senior scientist at the Research Institute of Oncology and Hematology at Cancer Care Manitoba. He obtained his PhD from the Banaras Hindu University at India and moved to the Saskatchewan Care Agency and Department of Pathology at the University of Saskatchewan to pursue postdoctoral training. He was awarded the CIHR postdoctoral fellowship in 2004 to investigate the role of myristoylation in colorectal cancer. Dr. Srivastav's research program is dedicated to understanding alterations in signaling pathways leading to cancer onset and progression of colorectal cancer, prostate cancer, and breast cancer. Dr. Srivastav has published over 50 journal articles and reviews. He holds several patents on cancer diagnostics, and clinical studies are in progress to commercialize screening and predictive tests. His expertise is in taking basic research from bench to bedside. With that, Dr. Srivastav, we're happy to have you with us today. You may begin whenever you like.
Well, thank you, Ria, for such a wonderful introduction. And thank you all. It's such a pleasure to talk to young minds, and you learn so much from them as well. My job is so easy now because of previous two speakers. My story is very similar to Dr. Alexander, and believe me, it's similar than you would imagine. My mom was a teacher, and my dad was an engineer in a defense under defense services in India. And my mom was teacher in my school, so it was even tougher for me. So there was a lot of emphasis on education, and yeah. So, and my story, the education system is very different in India, so I won't go through all of that how competitive it is, and just to get into a university. And I was fortunate to attend the #1 university in India, where there are only 300 seats, and you have to write an entrance exam, and more than 2 million students would write that exam to get into BSc. But then once you are in that university, it's like you don't really have to pay tuition fee and all of that. You get so many scholarships and whatnot. So from my BSc all the way to PhD, before getting your degree, you have to submit a no dues certificate in India that you don't owe any money to the university. And I remember I had to pay 700 rupees, which was like $12. So it was a fantastic journey. And while doing my PhD project, my first project failed as yours, Dr. Alexander. So it's very close to your story. So I was involved in a project to design some anti-cancer molecules, and it was very hard chemistry. It was highly moisture sensitive process. So you have to use, you have to do all those reactions and under nitrogen or in moisture-free conditions. And that project kind of failed. And sometimes it happens for good. So the next project that I picked up, again, and here the story is very similar to Jenifer. So there were like previous 4 or 5 grad students who tried on that project and it did not work. So my new supervisor, who wanted to get rid of me, so gave me that project. And fortunately, I could do all those syntheses just in 6 months, and I was ready to submit my thesis. And we published those works in very high-ranking medicinal chemistry journals. So, anyways, I didn't realize that it is going to be, such a fascinating way of storytelling. So I prepared some slides. So please bear with me. Okay, so, so here's a quote from Albert Einstein: "I have no special talents, but I'm only passionately curious." And that's, aptly applies to me as well, although I'm not I don't think I'm that as curious as Albert Einstein was. But the idea here is you need to be passionately involved, or you must be very passionate about whatever you do. So anyways, here is a brief background of me. I remember in grade 5, there was this trend: if there is a new teacher in your class, they'll ask what you want to become, and half of my class said engineer and half of them said doctor. And there were then 2 of us. I said I want to be a scientist, and the other boy said he wants to be a union leader, and I'm pretty sure he's a politician somewhere today. And then while I was in grade 10, my aunt, she was doing her PhD in chemistry, and she received a UNESCO fellowship to go to Tokyo Institute of Technology to do her postdoctoral training. And that really inspired me, and I knew then that I'm going to be in the chemistry field. And at that time, I decided to be, I aspired to be a cancer researcher. So I entered, I gave entrance exam to many universities, and I was fortunate to get into Banaras Hindu University. So they offer 3 years BSc honors course. And it was such that in first year, you can take 2 or 3 subjects, but from second year onwards, you only study chemistry. And it's really advanced chemistry. And then I did PhD in designing small molecules that would have anti-cancer activities. So it was all good. It was all hardcore chemistry. And my supervisor was collaborating with an immunologist from School of Biotechnology. And we wanted to test our compounds, whether they actually have anti-tumor activity or not. So I approached this another professor to test our compounds. And he said, I don't have any students right now. They all are finishing up their PhD thesis. And and I don't have any new student. If you can do it, you're more than welcome to test your compounds. And that's when I got hooked on to biology. And I have so many biologist friends, and I have seen that those who are from outside of biology field are really very good biologists. So anyways, then I moved, I did my postdoc from Saskatchewan Cancer Agency, where I got involved into more into classical biochemistry, and then I started doing cancer biology. Then I was offered an assistant professor position here at the University of Winnipeg. So I established a lab in cancer biology. So these are so I'm going to quickly show you some of the research that we do in my lab. And these are my students' work that I'm going to, touch upon. And it's not really that I'm going to talk very much about science, but I really want to give you an idea that there's so much that can be done in this life sciences space or area. We are more interested in taking research from bench to bedside, and I'll give you a glimpse of that, what it takes to take a research from lab and actually take it all the way to the market. So these are my grad students and postdocs who were involved in this work, and without them, it's not really possible. And I also have a lot of collaborators. Most of them are clinicians, and some of them are scientists. And without them, this work, again, is not possible. If you notice, I have a collaborator from University of Manitoba, Dr. Stephanie Portet, and she's a mathematician. So we also do some sort of mathematical modeling in my lab, and we collaborate with Dr. Portet on that particular research project. So, and I also have a disclosure to make here. I'm one of the co-founders of this spin-off company from university. It's called OncoDrex, and this company is focused on developing biomarker-based tests for cancers. And the lead technology of this company is a very simple blood test for screening colorectal cancer. So with that, my research interest is mostly in biomarkers. So what are biomarkers, right? Just to give you an idea. So any substance, structure, or process that can be measured in the body or its products and influence or predict the incidence of outcome or disease. And then there are specific cancer biomarkers. So what are cancer biomarkers? These are biological molecules produced either by the tumor cells or by human tissues in response to cancer that is objectively measured and evaluated as an indicator of cancerous processes within the body. So in my lab, we have discovered most of these kind of biomarkers, such as screening diagnostic biomarkers. So our screening biomarker is a simple biomarker-based blood test for colorectal cancer screening. We also have developed a prognostic biomarker, which is for testing breast cancer and also testing some of the invasive breast cancer. We have now, we are developing another predictive biomarker, which is for triple negative breast cancer. And it's, there's so much of research in this area. And I'm pretty sure many of you know this website. It's a database, and you can go to this database. It's called PubMed, and that's where you can go and do all your scientific literature search. And if you type this keyword biomarker, you almost get around 900,000 research articles on biomarker. Okay. And if you further refine this to cancer biomarker, you will almost get like 350,000 articles on cancer biomarkers. And if I further refine it, because our lab is more interested in protein-based biomarkers. So if you put a protein biomarker cancer, these keywords in there, you get almost 250,000 papers, right? Now, that kind of research is going on in cancer biomarkers, especially protein-based cancer biomarkers. And there are only a score of protein-based biomarkers that are approved by FDA. FDA is the regulatory body of United States that approve any drug or diagnostics. And the reason for that is it's a daunting challenge to take research from bench to bedside, and especially if it is related to biomarker discovery or diagnostics, right? So in the beginning, you start with number of analytes, and you have to go through different stages, right? And so you will first conduct some sort of preclinical exploratory studies in your lab, and if you find something interesting, then you would start developing an assay. This assay could be a novel assay, or you would use some standard platform technology for your own discovery. And then the next step is going to be retrospective validation study, where you go back to some tumor banks and take tumor tissues and do retrospective studies. And then finally, you still have to do a prospective validation study where it's a real-time study. You recruit patients from clinical centers, and then you evaluate your diagnostic or therapeutic, whatever it is. And as you move towards bedside, your financial burden increases, and also the number of samples increases. Just to give you an idea, to take a molecule, a discovery molecule, all the way to the approval of that molecule as a drug, it costs almost $800 to $900 million. Okay, so that financial burden increases. So it's very difficult, to translate research from bench to bedside. And there are so many, not just technical, scientific, but economic hurdles as well involved in it. So with that said, so we have developed a biomarker-based, a protein biomarker-based blood test for screening colorectal cancer. And here is a question for you. This is a poster that was published by US Public Health Service in cooperation with the American Society for the Control of Cancer. If you look at that poster, what do you think when this might have been published? Take a guess. Anyone? Which year?
1970s.
Good guess. Anyone else? This poster was published in 1938. So since then, we knew that early is the watchword for cancer control. So earlier it's diagnosed, better it is, and better the chances of survival. Despite that, like after almost 8 decades, we are still not there. To give you an example, colorectal cancer is the most preventable yet least prevented form of cancer. So what you see here is a normal colon, and then over the age of 50, there appears these bump-like tissues in the colon. They're called polyps. Some of these polyps, called adenomatous polyps or precancerous polyps, that transform into colorectal tumor over the period of 5 to 10 years, giving you a long window of opportunity to detect and, in fact, prevent colorectal cancer. How can you do that? So there are many screening tests right now, which are recommended for everyone over the age of 50. So these are some invasive tests, and I will only focus here on this fecal-based test or poop-based test, which are approved in Canada. So this GFOBT is the test which is approved in Canada, and it has very low sensitivity. And for precancerous polyp, the sensitivity is merely 24%. On top of that, it's a poop test. So it's the highly unpleasant nature of the test reduces the compliance for screening. So we have discovered a novel protein biomarker, which is present in very high concentration in blood cells of colorectal cancer patients. And this turned out to be highly specific and sensitive, not only to cancer, but also to precancerous lesions. And just to give you an idea, this is simply visualizing that protein in blood cells. And these are all blood cells here. And the brown coloration depicts the concentration of our biomarker. And you don't really have to be a pathologist to see the difference. It's almost like day and night, right? So this is the test we have developed. And just to give you an idea how this test performs compared to other tests which are there in the market. So this is the test. If you see, our test is highly sensitive and specific to adenomatous polyps or precancerous polyps. Okay. So we believe that once we launch this test, this would be a highly accurate test, very user-friendly. It's simply a blood test. It can be included into a person's yearly blood work. And this way we will be able to save many more lives. And I'll give you a timeline or the flow chart, how you can take a discovery all the way to that discovery to be a product. So this is the commercialization roadmap. Proof of concept study is what you do in your lab. Then you have to take that study out in a suitable environment. In our case, it's a clinical trial. So you can do a pilot clinical validation study. Then you have to do assay development. And once your assay is developed, you have to go and talk to regulatory bodies. And once that's approved, you have to run clinical trial, get approval, and then launch the product if there is a company to do so. So other research in my lab is on predictive diagnostics, companion diagnostics, and we are now entering into developing small molecules. So that was just to give you an idea about the kind of work we do. And during discussion period or Q&A, I'll be more than happy to talk more about the avenues and what you need to do, what kind of preparation you would require to enter into health research field, or even what kind of preparation you would need to get into any of the professional degrees. Okay, with that, thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Shrivastava, for sharing your journey into research, your projects, and your vast knowledge in this field. Your passion for cancer research is so inspiring and is definitely making an impact in many people's lives, so thank you.
Thank you.
Now we will be moving on to the question period of today's panel.